that basically he's going to tell Putin to stop the war.
Yes.
Now, he seems to have backed off from that and said, okay, we had a good meeting, and now I'm going to see how we can bring peace. So his basic demand that they have to stop the war immediately, that did not happen. If European Union wants to fight the war alone, without the United States, it can't do it. So it knows that. European NATO says, daddy. Okay, Trump is the daddy. I think the question is, how long can European Union drag on the war? And what is it they can invest in the war? Money, manpower, forces?
Yes. Hello and welcome to Left Lens. Today we have Comrade Prabir Purkayastha with us. Comrade Prabir is a well-known activist, writer and journalist. He's also an engineer by training. As the editor-in-chief of NewsClick, he has played an unparalleled role in taking progressive movements and people's issues to the wider audience. Comrade Prabir, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to Left Lens.
Pleasure to be here.
So, international relations is something that you observe and follow very keenly. I think we'll focus on that today. The Ukraine war has been going on for some time, but all of a sudden now Trump seems to be claiming himself as the absolute peacemaker. We've seen Putin and him meet. After that, we've seen Zelensky meeting him at the White House. But even before that, the meet in Alaska, what do you think were the outcomes of that?
Well, that's the question that everybody is asking. What is the outcome of that? Okay, so till we have a resolution, some kind of peace process, we will have to say, let's wait and watch. He had made a lot of noise before the meeting with Putin that basically he's going to tell Putin to stop the war.
Yes.
Now, he seems to have backed off from that and said, okay, we had a good meeting, and now I'm going to see how we can bring peace. So his basic demand that they have to stop the war immediately, that did not happen.
Yes.
It was also very clear, if that had to happen, the war would not have happened.
Yes.
So the question really is that Russia was very clear from the beginning that if NATO wants to expand right up to its border, and with Ukraine, which has a large Russian-speaking population, in fact, it was a part of originally of Russia. It was only post-revolution that a part of it was attached to Ukraine. Or a set of people who are now claiming to have the identity of Ukraine. And therefore, the language became barred after the Maidan coup, as it were. And then this is where the civil war in Ukraine starts. Initially against the Russian-speaking population whose language was banned. You could not use it, schools, colleges, newspapers, television, radio, all of it, Russian language was banned. So the very large minority, in fact, the major, largest minority is one part, but really the mode of communication in school, colleges, in television, in radio was largely Russian. In fact, those speakers who claimed they're Ukrainian leaders, all of them spoke Russian better, more fluently than they spoke Ukrainian. So that is the backdrop of the war. And Russia intervened in order to protect the Russian-speaking minority, which at that point of time were being pushed back, their areas were taken over, and basically what could emerge as a program was taking shape in Ukraine. So that's the origin of the war. And unless that is resolved, I don't see Russia stopping, because that's the whole purpose with which Russia intervened. Now, a solution is possible provided you say, okay, the Donetsk area, we will agree to what Russia is saying, and Russia has to then give us certain other portions. And of course, there is no question that the naval base in Sevastopol is not open for discussion, and whether Russia will then forego other claims. So that's a negotiation, that is a possibility, but it cannot happen by Russia saying, okay, we have now agreed to peace as is, where is, or we will withdraw, as Trump might want to say. So I think that's where it is. The question is, will European Union and Zelensky come down to a more reasonable proposition for peace or not? And can the European Union, basically they are the ones who are instigating the war, really, and want the United States to fight the war they have instigated, can they really pull back from that?
Yes.
I think these are open questions.
You've led on to my second question, in fact, because you mentioned NATO, and now you also mentioned European Union. This Zelensky-Trump meet, and in fact, after Putin and Trump meeting in Alaska, you've had this European Union leaders all trying to meet Trump and, almost like persuading the US to stay back, stay invested in the war. In this scenario, how do you look at the NATO bloc, or if you could even say the US-led bloc? What is going to be the future of that when there seems to be no, letting down from one end?
Well, let's be clear. If European Union wants to fight the war alone, without the United States, it can't do it. So it knows that. So therefore, they're important to keep, as their leader said, the European NATO says daddy. Okay, Trump is the daddy. So they need therefore to keep daddy in the war. But at the same time, the United States is also making clear that its interest is today the United States and only the United States. It really doesn't care for its allies. And I think it's making that clear in the way they have handled the trade negotiations with the European Union and so forth. And they don't seem to be invested anymore with the Ukraine war, because essentially joining NATO, more or less Trump has said that's not a possibility. So given all of it, I think the question is, how long can European Union drag on the war? And what is it they can invest in the war? Money, manpower, forces? Yes, they have the ability to produce shells, guns, even tanks. Germany is still an industrial power. So is France. Not as much. UK is, of course, as we know, a weakened industrial power. It doesn't have an industrial base left. So yes, it can continue the fight. But will the European population, the EU population, agree to a large part of its finances to be diverted for the Ukraine war? Those are questions, because both from the left and from the right, there is a resistance to continuing this war, because they see it not in Europe's interest, which is to come to an understanding with Russia, but in the interest of NATO and really the United States. But that calculation is changing, because Trump seems to have the calculation that European Union has to look after itself. We will do something, but our interest is to extract money from everybody, whether it's European Union, it's China, whether it's India. And there in Bengali, we have an expression that the cat really defecates on soft soil. So Trump is looking for soft soil to extract US surplus. European Union is a soft soil for it. That's what it believes. Now, whether which other countries will do it, that's a big question.
You said the US is looking out only for their interests. You also mentioned trade negotiations. Trump tariffs. It is very clear that, the US is looking out for its interests. And even with their own allies, be it European Union, Korea, Japan, they're trying to exact as much as possible by, imposing some sort of tariffs on them. If you look at India, for instance, 50% tariffs. Another BRICS nation, Brazil, getting 50% tariffs. Do you see a pattern in this? How is this whole situation emerging?
I think there are two things we need to really register here. One is the end of the American hegemony over the world, which is really a post-Second World War phenomenon. That's when Europe acceded to the leadership of the United States. Great Britain or the United Kingdom ceased to be a global colonial power, which it was before the Second World War. And you see also the diminution of the European colonial powers again. So there are two things are happening simultaneously, and it's, I think, important to register that why the BRICS has come as basically the target. So the first is the fall of the American hegemon. Now that the end of politics, which is what Fukuyama said, the end of history. So that end of history has ended. Okay, clearly history still continues. So that is one. The great the new Roman Empire is no longer going to serve. So that part is clear. But it is also the fall of Western European domination over the world. And I would put here the United States and Canada as an extension of Western Europe, because it's those countries who supplied the immigrant communities which were involved in the genocides in the United States and the emergence of finally the United States. So this is the West Europe, or let's call it the West, as they would like to call it. The West domination of the world, which is really post-Columbus, say 200 years, by which the first major victory is really Bengal presidency. They're
1760s.
1757, 58, I don't remember the exact year.
Buxar, Plassey, all that.
Basically, Sirajuddaula losing in the Battle of Plassey. That's the turning point of India's history, from which base then they take over India. And India, of course, provides both the money as well as raw materials, as well as textiles, and also soldiers. Let's not forget, the British Army was the British Indian Army, even in the First and Second World Wars. So that is the history of colonialism. I think that long arc of history is also coming to an end. And you are seeing the rise now, for instance, Africa, Latin America, Asia, of course, because Asia, China and India were always the world's largest economies. And they are slowly taking their place again. You have Southeast Asia, which has become a big player. So if you put all of it together, you are seeing two changes, really dramatic changes in world politics taking place almost simultaneously. Not simply the erosion of the inevitable empire, the United States and its empire, but also the Western hegemony over the world for the last 300, 400 years, both coming to an end. And I think that's when you see, when you talk of the tariffs and the economies, then you will see who are the target. It is not China alone. And in fact, China has less tariffs than India has at the moment. You will see Brazil, India, China. And what do they represent? Really the core of BRICS. And that is what they're now looking at, that how to stop the rise of the economic forces in the world. Because China, India, Brazil are emerging as three major economies in the world. And that's why if you take a picture, an economist has this nice chart which shows who are the ones who have been targeted. You will find whether you take the totality of the tariffs, multiply the tariffs by the amount of goods that is exported, imported, and take that into account, or you take the tariff simply. Both ways, Brazil, India, China are the three primary targets for the United States, except China also holds leverage, which Brazil and India don't, which is that they have the rare earths. They have certain things which they have, the supply chain they dominate. It's not just the raw materials. That's a mistake people make when they think of rare earths. They dominate the entire supply chain. And electromagnets in that actually are something which require rare earths, and that enters a huge number of devices. For instance, from your fridge to your, of course, EVs, the turbines, even cameras, all of that, any motion is electric motor driven, and of course, battery comes into play. But really the issue is those electromagnets almost are entirely at the moment manufactured in China. And they have been planning this. I think they expected the chip war to emerge some point or the other. So they wanted some counterplay. And this is something, I remember I had written 30 years back, the self-reliance in the modern world means that your ability not to manufacture everything, but manufacture something which you are the global leader.
Yes.
In which case, then you can bargain with any other power.
Yeah.
And that's what China seems to have done more successfully. That kind of leeway, neither Brazil nor India has. And that is one of the reasons I think Trump is willing to squeeze us more than he can squeeze China.
But you also see that there is a lot of activity happening after this. Ajit Doval has, visited both Russia and China. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has visited Russia. Then there are Putin, Modi, and Xi. They're going to meet at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. So there are even talks of the RIC, the Russia, India, China. About 30 years back, something was just set in motion, that being reactivated. How do you think that this is going to play out?
Well, crystal ball gazing is a rather difficult exercise. But simply put, I think there is a dynamic in the world which is difficult to stop. Yes. One is the weakening of US as an industrial power. And I don't see the possibility of their ability to reclaim that throne as a thing they might. So that's not going to happen. Military, yes, United States still remains a top dog. They still have the largest number of military-industrial complex, if you will. But that is one part of it. So yes, they still hold some cards in the game. And war is always something which is hanging over the world, even if the end of that war may not be leaving a civilization around. Yes. As Einstein is supposed to have said, he doesn't know which weapons will be used in the Third World War, but he can predict what will be used in the Fourth World War, which is stones and bows and arrows. So that's a prediction if you have a Third World War. So we don't know what's going to happen, but if you take technology, economics into account, or science for that matter, because science, technology, industry, then if you take these forces into account, it's very difficult to see United States being able to reclaim its throne. So what you are likely to see is how much can United States extract from rest of the world. And that is Trump's really tariff war against the whole world, including his allies. Yes. So I think this kind of surplus extraction using various instruments it has, and the most important, of course, the fact that the world's convertible currency is all dollar. So what others are doing is not confronting the dollar and creating an alternate currency, but trying to distribute the transactions not taking place to the dollar, but taking place to their currencies. And also the ability to transfer from one bank to the other directly without going to SWIFT. Yes. So those are long-term plans. They're not easy because the reason for having a dollar as a universal currency was always the ease of convertibility. You didn't need a 180 by 180 matrix to do your calculation of what would be the conversion rate. You could just do each against the dollar. So given that, this is going to take time. But the only advantage is if it is led by economies of the size of India, China, and Brazil, and of course the big oil countries who also have really large amount of exportable surplus, then there is a possibility of something emerging which will not be that easy to sanction. It will be much more robust if it is many-to-many connection, rather than everything occurring through a centralized currency like the dollar, and therefore the SWIFT being under US control means that all the dollar transactions come under US control. So I think those things we have to wait and watch. But I think that dynamics has already set in a way that's very difficult to go back from that. And it is being accelerated by the stupidity of financial sanctions the US has loved to impose on so many countries around the world, and the European Union following suit in the case of Russia.
You talked of US trying to squeeze others, particularly so if you look at India. When this 50% tariffs is being imposed on India, when we are being attacked by US officials for buying oil from Russia, how do you think the Indian government should respond to this?
Well, first is let's take the same argument itself. Now, US has no problem buying uranium from Russia, as you know, buying fertilizers from Russia. European Union, its closest allies, has bought, of course, natural gas as well as diesel, as well as oil.
Energy reliant on Russia.
Yeah, and it still continues to, though it has stopped the North Sea pipeline and so on, but it still continues today to import lots of goods from Russia. And it's, in fact, the Russian trade is bigger than India's trade with Russia. So this is hypocrisy at a very high level, shall we say. That's why I said one should really not look at what they're saying, but what they're doing. To see what the real intentions are. The intentions are to break the Russia, India, China economic relations. And I think that is the attempt. And to say that if you want to behave like you want to be a strategic partner, Navarro's statement, you have to appear as one. So it's not being a strategic partner. It's being a subservient power is what is the ask that you have. Don't ask who we are doing with what, but you have to do what we tell you to do. So I think India has this whole policy of multiple alignment. It was always a problem because non-alignment means we have an independent path of development. Multiple alignment means we'll align with multiple parties. What happens if they have differences amongst each other? So all those questions were all unanswered. And Navarro, I think, has made it very crudely clear that what is expected of India, because they believe that India does not have a leverage the way China has. And India does not have the ability to be a relatively autarkic economy, which Russia is. So given that, I think we are entering this realignment of India's external politics. And it's a hard call the Indian establishment under Mr. Modi has to make, that what do they do? Now, at the moment they're trying to talk to others, trying to say, okay, we have always been friendly with you. We want to restart our trade relations, particularly with China. We seem to be moving forward on that. But if it is transactional and appears to the world as transactional, it doesn't really help. So question is, do we go back to India's vision of an independent foreign policy or multiple alignments? I don't really know what it means. Seems to have clearly reached a dead end, because people say you're trying to run with the hare, hound and hunt with the hound and run with the hare. So those kind of things, I think, are really catching up with us. That the ambiguity of these policies, no clear articulation of what it means, it meant that you have multiple dependencies as well. And I think that's what is really, at the moment, causing our foreign policy problems that we see. That we really did not envisage that the United States could play this role. We did not understand the new world which is emerging, in which the European and the American power, or what I call the ex-colonial and settler colonial states, powers coming to an end. They never saw the end of that history, and therefore they really do not have the circle theory, chakras theory, that comes from ancient India, Chanakya theory. That kind of, shall I say, ancient foreign policy, it doesn't seem to be suited for an era which is globalized enough that you don't really think of geographical chakras as the basis of foreign policy. So I think we are seeing the end of the Chanakya Niti, I think, which was the foundation of Indian foreign policy, and this multiple alignment theory, which was given by our foreign minister. I think both we are seeing the end of that, and unless we have a more sophisticated understanding of foreign policy, and that means international affairs, we are really going to be, in some sense, really not understanding what we have to do and a clear vision of where we want to go.
you use the word settler colonies, and that to me closely aligns with what is happening in West Asia now. West Asia is very dear to your heart. So let's try to wind up with that one issue. Over the last 23 months, we're seeing, a genocide unfurling in Gaza. The newest declarations are going to clear it all. What do you see is the end game of the Zionist regime in Israel?
I wish I could say the Zionist regime has an end goal. And this belief that their self-belief that the end goal is throwing out all the Palestinians, not only from what the historical Jewish state they want to establish, but also beyond. They want to really go beyond that. They want to talk about also going to Baghdad and so on. So all that, if you take that part out, what is very clear is a completely genocidal attack on the Palestinian population there, which has started most brutally with Gaza, the Gaza Strip, but is also now spilling over clearly to West Bank. Now let's look at Gaza, because right now, Gaza City, which has about 600,000 people, and if you take the surroundings, probably almost half the population of the Gaza Strip itself, they have said they will clear it out. Now, how will they clear it out? Obviously, by expanding the genocide they're already doing. And that expansion of the genocide, they have already got 60,000 additional troops to what already they have, and they're going to deploy that into the Gaza City. So this is what is going on. There is no drinking water available in Gaza. Food is available only to the extent of maybe 10% of what the need is. You have seen emaciated figures, children dying of starvation, old people dying, of course. So all of this put together, it's unfolding before our eyes. A day-to-day genocide, the larger colonial project of how to control West Asia is really what you see in Europe's support for Israel and, of course, the United States support for Israel. And therefore, the threat in September of recognition really doesn't have much of teeth, if they don't support it by other measures. Because if they continue to support Israel the way they are, just recognizing Palestine is not going to make a difference. And I think if they continue to supply the weapons for the Gaza genocide, it will be clear what is the intent that the European powers have, and how, while making all these hypocritical noises, we know the British anyway, but the other European countries know better, that these hypocritical noises, they are still willing to back the genocidal project, which the start is evacuate Palestinian people of all Palestinians and settler population to be put there, which will be loyal to West, and of course the United States being the leader of the West. That project still continues. I don't see these noises that the European powers are making of any consequence unless they're willing to put weapons embargo, which they're not willing to, or financial sanctions, which they're not willing to.
All right, Comrade, thank you. It has been a very comprehensive and enriching discussion. I think with that, it'll be a wrap for this episode of Left Lens. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.